In this lesson, we'll cover tips for getting better shots with your smartphone. These include composition, depth of field, exposure tips, and even photographing at night. Look for good compositions. Because you're limited in how you manually adjust your settings, to be creative in terms of exposure, great smartphone photography is mostly about finding great subjects and composing them beautifully. You learn the basic rules of composition in the composition section in this course. Use those tips with your smartphone. One way to help you do this is with the grid mode. One of our favorite things about shooting with a smartphone is using grid mode. You can go into your settings on your camera to activate this grid mode. It brings up a grid overlay on your screen that splits your camera into 9 different squares. It basically gives you a symmetrical grid across your screen to help you compose your shots in a pleasant manner. Check out this demo where we bring up grid mode and start shooting with it.
So I've got my phone here, I'm shooting Bill Shakespeare. Now I want to bring up grid mode because that's a really cool way to shoot stuff. I'm going to show you how to do that. It's very different on everyone's phone, but for us, let's go ahead and go to our settings. We're going to go down to the camera, past it right here. And now we're going to see where it says at the top, it's the second option on our phone. We're going to turn grid on. Now when we go back to our phone, we now have a grid that we can see, and you can really use that to kind of use the rule of thirds, putting people in grid mode or using it to center up things. You can see here we could center him, make sure that his eyes are at the top, put some negative space on him. Using the grid mode is really fun, and it's helpful when you're starting out and trying to use a rule of thirds.
Create depth of field as much as you can, using portrait mode or focusing on something in the foreground. This will help you throw the background out of focus. This shallow depth of field look will often make your photo look more professional and artistic. It's something you can do very quickly to make it look like you're shooting on a higher profile camera than just your phone. We have a complete demo of using the portrait mode of an iPhone X later in this section. Even if you don't have portrait mode, you can get shallow depth of field by moving closer to your subject and trying to put as much space between the subject and the background. Let's look at this in real time.
So we still have our grid mode on. I want to show you how to make your camera phone look even better. A good way to do that is getting back to that depth of field conversation. So putting things in the foreground and making things in the background way out of focus. Now it really depends on the type of camera you have in your phone, but a really cool trick to use would be putting something in the foreground. You can see here I'm putting the ground in the foreground, or putting the table in the foreground, I'm tapping on it so that the focus goes to the front. You can see how everything's blown out in the background. It's kind of a cool autofocus thing. Now if I get really close to Bill and we tap on his face, you'll see how this camera focuses on him and throws everything out in the background. Now it's not something all cameras will do, and this one doesn't even do it all that great. But the idea of having a foreground and having something way far back off in the background will really add to that depth of field look and that aesthetic that looks really professional.
Underexposed skies. Something I have noticed in smartphone exposure when shooting the sky is that the phones tend to lose highlights much faster than the shadows, and that can make your picture look blown out or have less appealing aesthetic. Try exposing the sky just a little darker than the phone would do automatically. Check out these two photos of the sunset. The one on the left is the phone's auto exposure for this particular situation. The one on the right is me sliding the exposure down just a bit to underexpose the sky a tad. Which one do you like better? There are some really awesome apps you can use to expose at night. Try looking into these and getting a phone holder for your tripod. Take your time setting up the shot and playing around with these apps, and the production value of a shot will go up for sure. This helps expose at night, and you'll be able to get some really cool shots. I hope you've enjoyed these tips for taking better photos with your smartphone's camera. If you have any tips of your own, please post them to the course so other students can learn from your own experiences.